I realized that healing from codependency, from trauma bonds, sometimes from the should I stay or go dynamic,
Mhm.
you're going to have to lean into being the villain. So it's your villain's journey, not your hero's journey to freedom, is expanding your capacity to be misunderstood, to be seen as the bad guy in someone else's story, because they're going to use guilt and shame to keep you energetically locked in to the relationship dynamic. And it's super common. And anybody who's listening, just know that you're not alone. And I've been there.
Welcome back to another episode of Rewiring Health. So honored to have Dr. Nima Rahmany on the podcast today. So thank you so much for being here.
So good to be here, Dr. Kelly.
Yes, I'm so excited for this conversation. We're just chatting a little bit and we're so aligned with so many things. And it's
It's
something
crazy.
that, yeah, I think it's like you can't talk about this enough because it's one of these like subtleties that so many of us live with. And
Mm,
what we're talking about is that idea of self-abandonment, that we put everybody else's needs in front of ours. We're constantly staying busy, we're overproducing, and yet at the end of the day, we're leaving ourselves behind. We're forgetting about
yeah.
our own essential needs. And what I would love to hear first is just talk about your story, if you don't mind
Yeah.
sharing what brought you into this work, because I know
Yeah.
your background is in chiropractic work, which is a little
Yeah.
different than this. So sure, if you don't mind sharing.
Pa- Patients coming in to see me are dealing with stress related issues. And when you get to know them after been doing this body of work for so many years, after a decade, ask any physical therapist, chiropractor, body worker, they'll tell you that there's an emotional kind of root cause behind people's issues, right? And so it wasn't until I went through a divorce in 2012 and a series of failed, about 8 or 9 failed relationships later, which really had me looking at myself, at my patterns, the way that I showed up in relationships. And I started to uncover my attachment style, understanding that I was what's called an avoidant, which is the type of relational dynamic that wants connection, but then when there is any type of stress within the relationship, there's two types. Type number one that wants connection and wants communion and pushes for connection, which is driven by the fear of abandonment. And then the other type, which pushes for space, pushes for tempo, pushes for I need my space, which is driven by the fear of what's called engulfment, the fear of being consumed. So we have these, I didn't know at the time, but we have these two anxieties that are fundamental within relational dynamics. It's what causes so much tension in relationships in general. I thought it was just me. I thought that there was something wrong with me. But what happened was I finally led to this one toxic relationship that slowly it's a 4 year relationship, but after around the 1.5 to 2 year mark, started to become abusive emotionally from her side, verbally, emotionally, energetically from her side, and then physical from my side. In reactive response, I would dissociate and go into dissociative rage. My protective parts would come out. And on March 11th, 2018, I slapped her. And I was embarrassed to realize that this wasn't like, this was, although over a 4 year period, there was a few instances, it wasn't like a one time thing. And it woke me up to going, all right, so how did I get here? How did I get to this point where I'm in this dynamic that's so toxic when I'm so intelligent? I help people with these hands. They're meant to help people, not hurt people. And I started understanding the polyvagal theory, attachment theory. I started understanding that in the moment of activation, when we get triggered, we regress back to our childhood kind of protective patterns that helped us survive childhood, but then caused destruction in our intimate relationships, in our businesses, in our careers. And I stopped being a chiropractor and I just went all in to understanding the neuroscience of attachment, polyvagal theory, shadow work. Because I really wanted to, I was 43 years old and I really wanted to experience what I had never experienced in my life, which was a relationship that felt secure. So I just went all in becoming the type of person that could safely co-create a secure relationship. And now we've been married for 5 years, and we have a 5-year-old son who turns 5 in a few weeks, just started kindergarten. And now I have a global community of cycle breakers, people who are really committed to putting down the magnifying glass where they blame other people and picking up the mirror and learning how to become secure individuals, secure parents, secure entrepreneurs, so they can lead from the heart rather than from their fears, from their old trauma responses. And what you were talking about, what I learned along the way, and what I love helping people, especially primarily people who are stuck in this people-pleasing pattern, is the awareness that they're running what's called a fawn response. We have the fight, flight, and freeze, which is our trauma responses that kept us safe in childhood. But the people-pleasing, the fawn response, is a performative niceness, is a signal of consent when our body is constraining and protesting. So it's a programmed, conditioned self-abandonment to protect us from the perception of not belonging in childhood. And unfortunately, it exhausts us and creates chronic pain, chronic illness in adulthood. And so I weave my story into the education of teaching people how to break free from that fawn response, how to break free from self-abandonment each time they get triggered. And so the concept of becoming trigger-proof was born.
Amazing. I was just like, it's so fascinating, like how, the relationships become the biggest mirror that we can have. When we are experiencing something in a relationship, it's so easy to point the fingers at, like, you did this, you said this. But the biggest gift that comes through the friction of relationships is that we can self-reflect and become aware of some of those patterns that we have within us that maybe have been unseen or unheard or not even brought any light to in years. So
Yeah, we
I just want to,
can.
yeah, it
Kelly, we
can. Not
can
everybody does.
self-reflect, but doesn't
Yeah.
mean people want to.
No.
In today's society,
Absolutely.
it's funny how self-reflection is my wife and I, our relationship. We get to create, if we set it up and frame it in the right way, our relationship becomes this container where we get to view parts of ourselves that we didn't know were there until something got reflected. But unfortunately, there is a population in this world, and especially that are kind of like in one branch of therapy, that self-reflection and accountability is really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they will avoid it. And so the people that I love talking to are the ones that have the willingness to self-reflect rather than put the blame and point the finger on other people. And so that's the distinction of those that heal, gain insight, and then those that stay stuck forever in a victim story.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's like it has to come from your own timeline of like when you become willing, like no one can force you to engage in any kind of self-reflection, self-awareness. And this can be such a frustrating pattern when you're in relationships because you may see these patterns in people and you may see them blaming, you may see them getting stuck in their own world of victimhood, and you really can't help them. They have to be willing to help themselves and put in the work. And that's really challenging when you're trying to navigate relationships with
Yeah.
people who aren't as self-reflective.
100%. And so the ones who aren't self-reflective, and I don't want to blame, but it's behavior that's very narcissistic. The narcissistic types are allergic to self-reflection, looking at themselves, taking accountability, taking responsibility, really confronts our shame. We have to actually look in the mirror and feel shame for our unconscious responses, our choices that we made, the way that we've abandoned ourselves for so long. And for me to own that I am at cause for my own self-abandonment, to consent to a relationship like this for so long is incredibly shameful. And so to integrate that shame is what's it's called. It's very ego dystonic. It's very confronting to our ego. And so we will choose unconsciously to avoid it by putting the blame on the other person. And so insight, growth, maturity is about integrating the shame that we all must feel when we take ownership of our own self-abandonment, and then throw the blame game, throw the word blame and fault out the window if we actually want to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And a word you brought up, which I want to dive into deeper, is cycle breaker. And I would love to hear you speak about that a little bit more, because this is something too, is like we can, we unconsciously live the patterns of our parents and generations prior to them. And then when we wake up to something different or we expand our level of consciousness, we can often see those patterns a little bit more clearly. And at some point, someone maybe becomes that cycle breaker, and it can be really challenging because of all the lineage of these unconscious patterns that have been just passed on from generation to generation. Can you
Yeah.
talk about, because it can be like that slippery slope, like, you could be that cycle breaker, and like you could pinpoint maybe, oh, it was my parents that instilled this in me. And of course, we never want to blame anyone. You talk about acknowledging that without blaming anyone.
Yeah.
We can harness the power of our own transformation, but also recognize maybe some of the sources of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, how to acknowledge without blame?
Mhm.
Really, it's a conversation when you're looking your field of view, your perspective, right? So you look at a situation where there's abuse in a relationship, like in my situation when we're talking about acknowledging without blame. When you look at it from a microscopic level in that moment, I was activated, reacted, and I reacted unconsciously by slapping my ex-girlfriend. In that moment, when we look at it microscopically without the history, we can say, oh, yeah, he's at fault for hitting her. And you would be right from that lens, of course, without any backstory, without any context. But if we actually want to heal, then we would look back a little bit and go into the runway over the last, 5 hours to 2 weeks of my experience of being bullied emotionally and boundaries being violated again and again. And then we say, okay, well, is it her fault? Right. And then you could make an argument that, yeah, well, then it's her fault. And then I reactively abused. Right. But then when you take that microscope that you've been looking and then you zoom out even further and further and further, and then look and see, oh, they were stuck in what's called a trauma bond, where they were acting out unresolved childhood patterns that they were both met, like beautifully just locked into, that kind of fed both of their unfinished business from childhood. Her situation with her father, who was hardly ever around, and she was constantly feeling like he wasn't a part of her life and felt abandoned by her, she got to repeat again and again and again through her relationship with me, who never really chose her. So she was fighting to be chosen by me, but unconsciously trying to get her father to choose her. And then in my situation, growing up with a mother who had zero concept of boundaries. So when my boundaries were trampled, the healthy version of me would be able to say, you know what? You're crossing a boundary. This is inappropriate. I'm leaving. I didn't have that awareness because it was normalized in my system of a emotionally volatile woman without any concept of boundaries that completely invalidated my experience. So in those moments, we could say, should we blame her father and then my mother for what's happening? So, and then you could make a case for that, and partially you'd be right. But then when we go back even further and zoom out even further back, that's why I have this photo in my background, because it's a constant reminder that perspective of each, you can zoom in and take a photo of that, of the earth, but then we can take a telephoto lens and go zooming in and see the microscopic cellular creatures on a leaf, and it's the
Mhm.
same thing. So which one is right? Right? So in the world of healing trauma, what I've observed is that getting out of the word, using fault and blame, must be the foundation. We must toss
Mhm.
out that word and realize, as we go back historically to my mother and what she was missing in her life and the codependent relationship she had with my father, and then my ex's father and her mother, who's a drug addict and alcoholic, drug addict, abusive, and what that was normalized in her family system, and then go back to their, the abuse that she experienced, when she was a little girl, her mother and her father, right? And then, so can you see where I'm going with this? So
Mhm.
how do we break the cycle? Becoming a cycle breaker is the person who acknowledges their pain and validates it, doesn't dismiss it, doesn't gaslight, say, oh, it never happened, suck it up, get over it. We make space for the nuance of the fact that, yes, we all are victims, and we all have perpetration within us as well, or the capacity to it. We have a victim and an abuser inside all of us, and none of that is our fault. This is not about blaming. And the cycle breaker is someone who raises their hand and says, it wasn't my fault, but it can end with me. It's my responsibility. And they're the ones that decide to alchemize all of the pain that they're carrying that didn't start with them, and turn that alchemy, is taking base metals and turning it into gold, into precious metals, and turning that pain into a purpose. And so the purpose that I've turned it to is taking my story and my pain that I have both endured and caused, to bring all of that home and to alchemize it into a message for people so that they can raise their hands and say, it ends with me too. I don't want what was incomplete with me to pass on to my children, because it will pass on to your children. Your
Mhm.
unconscious complexes that you haven't really faced and felt and worked through are going to then be acted out with your children. And so this is what a cycle breaker is: to heal without fault or blame, but taking full responsibility.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so powerful. I have two young boys myself, and it's really like through their eyes that it becomes even like the biggest mirror of my life of like, wow, like you see so many of those patterns and you're like, I refuse for you to go through some of the things that I've experienced. And so that has been such a
You
huge
get
catalyst.
it.
And so I
You
can
get it,
totally
sister.
get it. And it's amazing because it's not like, oh, you get it and everything is so clear. It's like things reveal as you go through
Constantly.
different
There's no
things.
finish
Always.
line.
Never.
As they
Yes.
grow up, they hit their teenage years. Now
Yes.
you
There'll
get
be
to face
more.
certain things that are incomplete in your teenage years. So the
Yeah.
concept of becoming trigger proof isn't about being trigger less.
Hmm.
It's about the pattern, the process, the work of welcoming whatever's arising within me and taking full responsibility for integrating it before I communicate it to you, because it's happening within me. So I can choose to play a victim to it and blame you for it and say that you're causing me harm. So we've conflated harm with being triggered. I'm triggered, therefore you're harming me. It's not exactly the life, the society, the way of being that I want to teach my son, that he's blaming other people for his triggers. Is it's happening within me. I'm going to take responsibility for creating that safety from within and then communicating to you what's happening within me.
Hmm.
That becomes the energetic boundary.
Yeah.
The boundary doesn't have to do about you. It's, hey, what you did there brought up some feelings within me,
Hmm.
and I'm not available to keep engaging with you in that way. And this moment, as I tell you that, Kelly, the way you respond to me with respect or invalidation lets me know if you're the right person to be in a connection with. So by sharing what's happening within me, because I am orienting within myself, not pointing the finger at you. I give you an opportunity to demonstrate to me whether you and I are going to be in a relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that explanation. It gives it so much clarity and clarity rather into it. And I want to go even deeper in that because one thing I've seen in my own journey and many people I've worked with is that as you start to navigate your own healing journey, you start to really care for that inner child, you start to become more aware of the patterns. Often the people, and it's usually the people closest to you, then it disrupts those relationships significantly.
Yes.
And then it can also, there's a narrative often that they'll have about what's happening, or, then you often may become blamed for things. Can you talk about, I would love to hear your perspective of like
Yeah.
knowing your truth, holding on
Yeah.
to truth, anchoring into yourself, even in the storm of all the other perceptions of what's going on around you.
Yeah. The, I remember after the incident happened with my ex, we went through this period where I felt so much guilt. And that was the moment when the story started to change. And I felt that I was now being manipulated because of my guilt. And her anxious attachment wanted to work on the relationship and wanted to control and set up a scenario where if you leave this relationship, then I'm going to file a police report.
Mm.
So if I don't get money and guarantees of this relationship, then I'm going to elect to file a police report. And I knew that that would probably damage my career. And so I started freaking out and I realized, and I stayed and I, did some work and I kept doing the work because I was terrified of the story of what happened getting out there. And so I realized that a lot of people stay stuck in relationship dynamics through guilt and through shame because to choose themselves will be causing them to be put in the bad guy, the villain role, which is extremely difficult to somebody who's very caring, who's very empathic, who is a rescuer like I am. So the fact that I was possibly going to be put in a negative light in public was so terrifying to me that I chose to stay in a relationship that was unhealthy because I was afraid of being the bad guy. And what happened was I was starting to get so much anxiety that I realized that, oh my gosh, your ticket to freedom of a toxic relationship pattern is expanding your capacity for guilt, expanding your capacity to be misunderstood, and expanding your capacity to be seen as the villain in somebody else's story, or in my case, in a group of people's stories, because it was at the time around 2018, before the whole Johnny Depp and Amber Heard thing that came out, that was really uh, illuminating for a lot of people who were in my situation. Um, it was that women are the victim, men are the perpetrators, and there's no nuance in here. And the whole Me Too kind of craze was taking off. And so that was part of the cultural zeitgeist that was keeping me trapped in this dynamic. And so I realized that healing from codependency, from trauma bonds, sometimes from the should I stay or go dynamic,
Mhm.
you're going to have to lean into being the villain. So it's your villain's journey, not your hero's journey to freedom, is expanding your capacity to be misunderstood, to be seen as the bad guy in someone else's story, because they're going to use guilt and shame to keep you energetically locked in to the relationship dynamic. And it's super common. And anybody who's listening, just know that you're not alone. And I've been there.
Mhm. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing your story with that. And it's so relatable and so spot on. And it's more challenging and more courageous of an act because when you've lived most of your life as that people pleaser, as that person who has gauged their own inner worth based on other people's opinions, the minute you
The
become that
rescuer.
villain,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. The
Yeah.
other, the fixer, all the weight depends on you. You've carried other people's emotions. And then when you stop doing that,
You feel
it
like a failure.
it is a challenge, and like
Yeah.
I think that's not talked about enough of like the challenge of it, the courage it takes to step away from what you've known to step into your own freedom, your own truth.
Yeah.
It cannot be downplayed, and it cannot be
It's
downplayed at
huge.
all. It needs to be spoken about because for anyone who's listening is on that journey, it takes a tremendous amount of courage
Yeah.
to step into your truth and own it over and over and over again because you're tested left and right, especially
Yeah.
when you're making that transition
I
out
call
of
that becoming trigger proof for that
yeah.
reason, because choosing
Mhm.
yourself, in that face off between attachment versus authenticity, right?
Mhm.
And you're choosing your authentic self means losing attachment, means being shamed, means not belonging.
Mhm.
Whether it's leaving a cult, whether it's leaving a religion that you had your social kind of connections to, and choosing yourself, whether it's coming out of the closet, right? Whatever it is, uh, this is why so few people express their authentic truth, because it's scary, and it will involve you losing people that were aligned with the inauthentic version of you.
Yeah.
So what you don't see on the other side, though, is all the new people that come in to get to you get to connect with, who know and love the authentic version of you. That's what's waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just cannot be spoken of the freedom that you feel like, my gosh, I don't have to put on that face. I don't have to play the role. I don't have to take on the weight of everybody else's problems. It's so freeing. And so even if it's challenging, there's no part of you that wants to go back to that.
Yeah.
You're like, I will keep foraging through this forest of
Yep.
craziness just to continue to feel like I feel. Like it's like you get to be home with yourself, even if you're not home with everybody else that used
Yeah.
to be in your life.
It's like the new Netflix sensation K-pop Demon Hunters movie. You got to watch it with your
Haven't seen
boys.
that. Yeah.
You got to watch it, but that's
Yeah.
exactly the story. That's why it's
Wow.
so catchy. It's a really great kind of rendition of that. It's that,
Mhm.
no more hiding, right? It's like taking off the mask and expressing the truth of who you are. Everybody deep down, we all have to deal with this dichotomy of the part of us that really wants to be seen and understood and known and witnessed and visible. But then
Mhm.
the other part that's terrified of visibility because of what that's meant from your childhood. It's meant rejection. Certain people aren't going to like you, especially now with social media. I get haters, you get trolls. Anybody who's done anything or created a big enough following has people who are hunting them down, hating them, whether you're
Exactly.
holistic psychologist, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Huberman, like, I mean, even
Mhm.
David Goggins has got haters. Like, it's it's the most courageous thing to do is to take off the mask and be yourself, and then experience being misunderstood and
Mhm.
cast as the villain. And so, especially in the work that I do, I help a lot of women with that fawn response, go from insecure attachments to secure. And a lot of the work is healing with the masculine, right? They
Mhm.
have female coaches, female therapists. So it's like taking the risk of having a man, especially with my history, and learning from him is scary. And so a lot of times through the process, they probably do this with you as well, with projection of their mother onto you, but they'll project all of their fears, their insecurities, the past men who've hurt them onto
Mhm.
me. And it's a constant practice for me in the work that I do to hold my ground and to hold space for other people's projections onto me. People who
Yeah.
don't even know me have already have been convinced of who I am based on filling all the gaps from their own kind of history onto you as the guide. So it's challenging work, but very fulfilling when you really master the art of being trigger proof. You can now hold space for other people's projections. They can say they misunderstand you. They can write lies about you, and you're able to see compassion because you
Mhm.
won't abandon yourself. That's the key. Becoming trigger proof is the rewiring of our conditioned self abandonment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. And it's like, there was a saying I heard, I loved it. It was like they don't make statues out of critics. And it's like if you're here to do something great, like you're going to get some backlash. You're gonna get people that are gonna try to pull you down because it becomes that again mirror for other people of like maybe some areas that they haven't grown in. And it's really challenging. We're all on this journey and it's just understanding that we have to have compassion for ourselves and others and knowing where people are and just allowing people to navigate their own journey at their own pace that they're
100%.
able to. So yeah, I absolutely love that. One thing I would love to get into is talking about some of these, like when we notice these triggers, especially when we're like dealing with our kids or we're just like going through life and we're seeing some of these emotions and they're coming up really hard and strongly. How can we heal some of those areas? How can we
Yeah.
go back and show that version of ourselves the
Yeah.
love and compassion so that we don't continue to replay these triggers in our life?
Yeah. That the discovery that I made through my own inner work that I haven't heard anywhere, but it was like a aha, is that unconsciously every time, let's use the example of when you're triggered by your kid, right? Your kid's having big emotions, they're throwing a tantrum, and in that moment you're triggered and you're reacting to them. You're telling them calm down, you're telling them go to your room, whatever it is that's causing that reaction within you. If you're able to pause in that moment and drop into your body where you're feeling the most constriction and ask this question, what am I making this mean about me?
Mm-hmm.
What am I making this mean about me? You'll start to answer if you're honest and you
Mm-hmm.
don't focus on them and you get really truthful underneath your ego defense strategies. You'll start to see, I'm making it mean I'm a bad mom. I
Mm-hmm.
did this with a session yesterday with a woman who has had a really estranged relationship with her adult daughter, and she's like, I just don't feel safe around her. And I'm like, okay, well, what happens? She goes, when I'm around her, she gets super emotional and then blames me for all the problems in her life and da 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 da. And so then I just shut down, and so I avoid her. So she feels abandoned by me, and I'm like, okay, so let's go into this. In the moment that she's expressing her emotions, what do you make that mean about you? And she goes in and starts crying. She goes, I'm a terrible mom. Like, in that moment when your daughter is or your child is expressing something, they're asking for connection. But when you unconsciously make it mean I'm a bad mom, you're the one that's abandoned you. They didn't abandon you, you abandoned you. So
Mm-hmm.
then your protective parts come up because they're trying to avoid feeling like a shit mom.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what I had her do was sit and feel like a shit mom for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked her, how old is this part of her? And you'll start to see younger self coming up where her mom was big emotions and she's chastising her. And what's happened now is that she unknowingly has been parentifying her child's anger as though it was her mother's.
Mm.
So this is the cycle.
Yeah,
This is where it
exactly.
became the cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
now she's parentifying her child rather than seeing her as a child that wants connection and is
Mm-hmm.
feeling sadness and just wants understanding. She's now seeing a mother chastising her. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no way she can be a mother to her child because she's projecting mom onto her child. And it was like this big, huge revelation, and she rewired. We started the process of rewiring her self-abandonment towards her mother's
Mm-hmm.
you know big emotions, and all of a sudden broke that cycle by seeing the innocence of a mother who couldn't handle her emotions, seeing the innocence of her younger part that could not that took on that everything was her fault,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when we looked, I said, why was mom so volatile to you? She goes, oh, she got pregnant and didn't want to be pregnant. And it was like it was the I'm not sure, she was like it was the product of a rape. That's what it was. It was
Mm-hmm.
the product of a rape. And so her mother, every time she saw her, was reminded at her own failure.
Mm.
right? So the trauma of the rape, now this young woman, young girl, was taking it on, and it had nothing to do with her.
Yeah.
And she literally broke that cycle and saw how it was passed down to her daughter, and is now starting the process of breaking that cycle. But it all has to do with her going in and seeing the innocence of a little girl who was receiving all the projections of a mother who was raped, and
Mhm.
then seeing the innocence of a mother who was cast in this position and felt a lot of shame about it. And she's slowly started to break that, and now starting to heal that relationship with her daughter. And she's a true cycle breaker. But the key component of this is, um, the moment we get triggered, we abandon ourselves. And so becoming trigger proof is about the art of self repair. Moment
Mhm.
to moment, each of the things that trigger us the most are the things that cause us to abandon ourselves. And it was a huge discovery, and I love teaching people how to navigate that. And when you do that, it's really cool. You no longer get activated by your kid. You now are able to show up as your adult self. You're able
Yeah.
to attract mature relationships because you are now maturing. You're not regressing each time you get triggered. So it's a really beautiful practice that's changed my life and changed the quality of the people around me, because I no
Mhm.
longer have low value relationships with people who can't own their part anymore. And I'm married, happily married, and I'm teaching my son all of this stuff because I don't want him to get into similar type of codependent dynamics that I was in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, like so much time and energy is spent on like the surfacey stuff of like you said this, but it's like diving deeper and understanding what's going on below the surface is so powerful. And it's like as you were speaking, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I had a moment where I was became aware of what I was saying. It's like we took our kids out to do something fun and like spent the whole day out, came back home, and they wanted to do something, I forget what it was. And we're like, no, no, we got to go to bed. And they just lost it. And I was like, when is it enough? We just did a whole day. When is it enough? And I just like, and I had that like big response. And then I like took a moment. And I'm like, oh, this is me feeling like I'm not enough. And then I
Yeah.
know that is from childhood. Like
They're
I,
just being
oh,
kids. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And I knew it was me. And I just recognized I'm like, and I apologized for at that moment because I was like,
Mm.
that's mine. And I even told
That
him
was
that's my
yours. Yeah.
stuff.
They're not saying you're not enough. You were
Exactly.
saying, I'm not enough. You were
Exactly.
abandoning yourself in that moment.
Totally. And I
Beautiful
caught it and I was
catch. I
like,
love it.
yeah. And it's like those moments I'm like, oh my gosh. And yeah, it took me right back to childhood when I'm like, I don't feel like I'm enough. And then it's like, yeah,
Nothing is ever good enough for you.
yeah, yep, exactly. So
Totally.
it is so profound and it really is, we can be angry after these big responses like, oh, I'm sick of feeling like this, but they really are the biggest
Mhm.
gifts because they
100%.
highlight the areas that are not healed in us and that need our attention and our love and compassion. So it's
Yeah.
so powerful to have those.
Totally. I want everybody, if you're listening to this, I want you to imagine what it would be like to actually be a master of your emotions, like
Mhm.
have emotional mastery the moment you get triggered, to
Mhm.
not be afraid of being in situations and getting into conversations because you're afraid of feeling a certain way,
Right.
that your relationship with your emotions themselves become more relaxed, more understanding, and more compassionate towards all of these parts of you, your sad parts, your scared parts. And so that is the greatest gift of being trigger proof. Like my anxiety levels have gone from like I was like a 9 out of 10 all the time to now a 2 or a 3. And
Mhm.
even if I'm speaking to a group of like 3,000 people, which is next week, I'm not losing any sleep around it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so this is really about expanding your capacity, your resilience, to be able to handle challenging things, which is
Mhm.
what life is, what parenting is, what running a business is all about. So becoming trigger proof saved my life, and I
Yeah.
love practicing and teaching others who are really keen on doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, so incredibly powerful when you are willing to do the work and reflect on some of those experiences that you've had and some of the emotions that you're experiencing. And I want to just dive into, because I know something that you and I very much vibe on is understanding the impacts of the body and the emotional impacts on the body. And I would love for you to share your experience when you were going through everything in your past relationship. Did you have any signs in your body that things were not, that
I
were
was very
real?
fortunate in that, it would only show up as insomnia and digestive issues. And really, it was anxiety. It was this sense of hypervigilance, this sense that I was looking for evidence that everything was going to be taken away from me. I was living in my body, in my nervous system, a story, kind of like when we left Canada, we left Iran at the age of 4, when I was 4 with my twin brother, because of the revolution, the Islamic revolution was happening. So my dad literally picked up and left everything and started all over again. So in my system, especially around December, my system then lives and starts gathering and collecting evidence that I'm going to lose everything. And so
Mm,
that hypervigilance was kind of like carrying with me through my entrepreneur life, and when I sold my chiropractic practice, and when I was starting my business with mentoring and teaching and coaching. And so it was of no surprise that my system recreated the very thing that I was afraid of, because it was familiar. It was like I was waiting for it. It was like my system was saying, "Oh, there, see, I told you were going to lose everything." So healing and rewiring that has been part of my journey. So this spans not only your health, your digestive system, the people who are listening are going to want to listen for those who are fawners, who are chronically people pleasing and abandoning themselves. You can't do it without resentment, and that
mm,
resentment turns inward. So if you're constraining your voice, that inflammation, that resentment here will create thyroid issues. Over here will create digestive issues. Down here will create reproductive system issues. So there are these energy centers that, with the constraining of our voice, of our heart, of our gut instinct, um, over time creates symptoms in those areas. So going to the doctor to manage symptoms versus actually going to the root cause and breaking that cycle and those patterns is the task. Your body's not working against you. I realize it's just trying to get you to be authentic.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's so powerful. It is that big communicator. It's just that we ignore it, we suppress it, we don't listen to it.
We
We,
try to medicate and just keep
yeah,
going.
exactly, 100%. Yeah, and we feel that pressure of like society. We just got to keep moving. We have things to take care of. I can't feel like this, and yeah, it's a vicious cycle. And especially if you're not aware of the connections of this, you look at all the media and all the pharmaceuticals and everything just saying
Bingo.
"Take this, it's a magic pill," and then all the repercussions of that. It's really understanding like the power is not out there, the power is within you always, and just understanding that and really embodying that is so amazing for
It's a
your
practice, yeah.
energy.
It's a
Yeah.
it's a wonderful practice to
Mhm.
master yourself, and it's called shadow work. These
Mhm.
parts of you that get activated are in your shadow, so you get to look at them, and then how we work with that energy instead of pushing it away, suppressing it, learning how to feel it, how to move that energy through the body, causes you to actually feel safe with all parts of yourself. I'm done fighting aspects of myself. I'm done wearing a mask. I'm just being my authentic self, like whether I'm in public or whether I'm with my family.
Mhm.
It's really neat. It's really neat to be able to just to be the exact same person either
Yeah.
way.
Exactly. And you just don't divert all the energy to all the faces that you have to put on and make sure everybody's
It's
okay with who
exhausting.
you are. Completely exhausting. And you don't even
Yeah.
realize, I think it's just like you're in survival mode for so long.
Yeah.
You don't realize that you're doing that until you start to live a different way. You're like, gosh, how did I keep that going as long as I did? It's,
That's where chronic fatigue comes
yeah,
from. The
totally. Yeah.
exhaustion of putting on a mask and
Mhm.
pretending to be somebody just for
Yeah.
approval. And doesn't have to be that way. You can heal if you have the right guidance, you have the right support, you have the right training. you can rewire those conditioned self-abandonment. And our triggers become the portal by which we can actually do that if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I just want to talk about, because you talked about some of the insecure attachments. Can you talk about how do we create more of a secure attachment with
Yeah.
our mothers?
Yeah, because of our upbringing and the way that our caregivers, mom and dad, connected to us, especially mom,
Mhm.
whether we felt like they were inconsistent and we constantly, they were different each time, that creates an anxious type of attachment. The other style of attachment, called the avoidant type of attachment, is when any expression of your emotions or desire for connection was met with shut down or neglect. You kind of learn there's no point in me expressing my needs. So I'm just going to go off and be by myself and be an island and just work on it myself. And so the third type, which is called fearful avoidant or disorganized, is when you have one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. It's a combination of both. And so these are all because of unresolved trauma with our attachment to our primary caregivers. So we go into adulthood, and when we have distress within a relationship dynamic, most of the people listening might notice themselves in an anxious attachment. They want connection. They want to resolve it. They'll abandon themselves. They'll fawn. They'll say, okay, sure, everything's fine, just for the sake of like connecting. And in so abandoning themselves, and the more pressure and anxiety you chase, as you pursue, it creates this lack of safety for the avoidant, which you're likely connected to, and wants more space, which then causes you to push harder, which causes them to pull away more, which causes you to push harder. And this is called the infinite loop of doom, the dance of the anxious and the avoidant. And our goal is to become more secure. And if you're more of the avoidant that constantly is attracting this energy, which is all trying to get more of you, the feedback here is that you're not integrating, you're not making a connection with the younger part of you that felt like they were always responsible. That
Mhm.
connection meant obligation.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah.
connection and love meant obligation, there's a part of you that wants love. Then when it shows up, you freak out and you're like, get me out of here. And so it's about you healing with this younger part of you so that younger part of you that felt obligated trusts you in being able to set boundaries. That's
Mhm.
what'll make you more secure. Whereas if you're in more of the anxious style of attachment, your work is to lean into self-regulating, not needing the other person to be your sense of safety, to develop a trust with this younger part of you that's always seeking mommy and daddy to soothe them. Your work is to be that parent to that younger part that needs validation from the external. So
Mhm.
each part has, and here's the crazy part, is we all have both parts.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so learning how to navigate this fear of abandonment and fear of engulfment is the work. And when you do that, you become more secure. You're able to have a rupture and then repair. You're able to ask for some space and then create safety in the other person
Mhm.
who gets more anxious when you pull away. You can actually create it so that you both get what you want. There is a option C here where you can facilitate safety with both parties, but you got to look inward first. And that's what being trigger proof is all about.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing those types, because it's like you can see yourself, and I can see myself in both of those, yeah, at some point. And I can see
You have
the,
both, depending on who the
yeah.
partner is.
Yeah, 100%. And like I can see the me 10 years ago versus me now, big difference, and how that is showing up in my life. And so yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. For anyone who's listening, you can really maybe see yourself in some of those examples. And I know you mentioned that you had a free gift. Do you mind just sharing what that is
Yeah, I
and
mean,
people can
my
find
first place that I began was understanding my attachment style.
it?
So if you don't know what that is, it's a series of about 7 minutes of questions, which then spits out your video of what your attachment style is, and especially exactly what you need to do to kind of resolve that. And so I provided a link for people to fill out the quiz. It's the attachment style quiz, and then you'll be emailed your results, and then it just, you set up the foundation of where you're beginning so that you know where to go. It's not the end all and be all, it's like, it's not a diagnosis that you're stuck with forever. It's a starting point if you're willing to do the work. So I kind of love to share the insights of what that looks like, what the patterns are, and then what you need to do to get back on track to becoming a more secure person in yourself so that you can then pass that security on to the kids.
Amazing. And I'll put the link in the show notes. So if you're listening, definitely check that out. And I just want to thank you for everything you shared today. There's so much golden insight into this. And I know it's just going to help plant that seed that you can live a different life and really allow yourself to feel more freedom in your life. So thank you.
You're welcome, Kelly. It was such a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely enjoyed it too. And again, for anyone listening, if you found value in this, make sure you share this with somebody else who can also gain that value from it and allow us all to expand and elevate. So it's the only way we can improve the world and improve each other. So thank you so much.